I was halfway through mowing my lawn when I saw her, Florinda Stapleton, head of the Willow Creek HOA and self-declared queen of the block, marching straight toward my property line with a clipboard in one hand and a posture like she owned the sky. "Zayden O'Connell," she barked, stepping right onto my freshly cut grass. "I warned you about the color of that mailbox. It's still not HOA compliant." I shut off the mower and let out a long sigh. "Florinda, it's black. It was black when I bought the house 3 years ago." "It's always been black." She stepped closer. Too close. Her lavender perfume hit me like a perfume grenade. "Well, the board had a meeting and we've decided black is too aggressive. It's not in harmony with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I took a step forward, standing between her and my porch. "You're trespassing," she blinked. "Excuse me. You're on my property. You didn't knock. You didn't call. You just stomped right onto my lawn with a clipboard like you're the sheriff of HOA County. You don't talk to the HOA chair like that," she snapped. "You'll be fined. Step off my lawn, Florinda." She opened her mouth, narrowed her eyes, and then did something I still can't believe. She pulled out her phone and called the cops. Right there, standing on my grass. "I'm being harassed," she said into the phone, loud enough for my neighbor Greg across the street to hear. I crossed my arms. "Stay right there. Let's see what the deputy has to say when he sees where you're standing." It took less than 10 minutes for a sheriff's deputy to pull up. Deputy Ramos, a guy I'd talked to before at a neighborhood BBQ. He stepped out, looked over at Florinda, then at me, then down at her feet. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "you're standing on his lawn." "Did he ask you to leave?" "Well, yes, but then this is trespassing." Florinda froze like her brain had hit a wall. "What?" "I'm going to need you to step off the property," Ramos said. "Now, but I'm the HOA president." "That doesn't override the law, ma'am." I watched her shuffle backward, bright red in the face, as if she finally realized her clipboard didn't come with legal immunity. Ramos turned to me. "You want to press charges?" I shrugged. "Not today. Just want her off my lawn." Florinda didn't say another word. She turned and stormed off like a cartoon villain whose evil plan just exploded in her face. But I knew better. That wasn't the end. That was just her opening move. The next morning, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. No envelope. No stamp. Just a typed notice with the HOA letterhead in the top corner and 3 bold words beneath it. Notice of violation. I read it twice while leaning against my truck. "Your mailbox color has been deemed non-compliant with revised HOA Aesthetic Guidelines Section 3, Subsection 9, Addendum B. You are hereby instructed to repaint your mailbox to an approved neutral tone within 72 hours or face escalating fines." There was no date on the addendum. No signature. Just a vague threat and a made-up section that didn't exist the last time I checked the bylaws, which was only last month when they tried to fine my neighbor for having a wind chime. I walked straight into my garage, pulled the binder of HOA documents from the shelf above my workbench, and sat down at the folding table. I flipped through the entire architectural regulations section. No subsection 9. No addendum B. Just the same language that had been there since the HOA incorporated 15 years ago. I took a photo of the notice and sent it to my buddy Marcus, who'd gone through hell with the HOA 2 years ago over a vegetable garden. Marcus was an electrical engineer by day, but had a surprising knack for local ordinance research. He called me back before I could even finish my coffee. "That's not even a real section," he said. I had the full bylaws scanned and backed up after they tried to pull a fast one on me over raised beds. Anything new has to be filed with the county clerk to be valid. "You still have that copy?" "I'll email it now." And for what it's worth, they need a 2/3 vote of the neighborhood to amend anything. That was the turning point. I printed out both the original bylaws and the fake notice and drove directly to the county clerk's office, where a very bored-looking woman named Shelley confirmed what I suspected. "No amendments have been filed for Willow Creek HOA since 2019, she said, tapping her long nails against the counter. Any changes made without being recorded here aren't enforceable. I left with a certified copy of the official bylaws and a receipt. Then I made a second stop Office Depot for 50 copies of a flyer I designed on the spot. It had the HOA logo at the top, followed by bold black text. Did you receive a violation for your mailbox? It's not legal. Here's why. Below that, I listed the county clerk's phone number, the section of the bylaws requiring public amendment filings, and a reminder that the HOA was not above the law. By sunset, every mailbox in Willow Creek had one of those flyers taped to its front. And by the time the sun fully vanished, my phone was lighting up with texts from neighbors I barely knew. Thanks for this, thought I was the only one. Got fined last week for a garden gnome, gonna call the clerk tomorrow. I knew something was off. Let me know how to help. The next morning, Florinda's car was parked in front of her house with the driver's door still open. I saw her pacing on the sidewalk, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing wildly. Her voice carried across the street. No, I don't care what the clerk said, we voted. It was unanimous at the board. A pause. I don't care if it wasn't filed yet, that's a technicality. I couldn't hear the response, but whatever it was made her go stiff as a board. She snapped her phone shut and stormed back into her house without closing the car door. By noon, everyone on the block had seen the flyer. Greg next door told me he'd already emailed the county to report multiple fake violations. Another neighbor, Maria, said she was printing extras to keep in her car. The mood had shifted. People were talking to each other in driveways, not just waving from porches. It felt like we'd all been pulled into the same trench without realizing we were fighting the same war. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a manila envelope taped to my front door. No note, just the envelope. Inside were 3 documents: a formal cease and desist letter from the HOA board, a second violation notice, and a bill for $250. The reason? Defamation of the HOA. I didn't even laugh, I just started recording. I walked into my garage, turned on my laptop, and opened a Zoom meeting I'd already set up with a friend of mine, Angela, an attorney who'd moved to Seattle but still held her license in our state. She read the documents silently on screen, then looked up with an expression I hadn't seen since college when she used to debate professors for fun. Zayden, she said, this is gold. They're operating like a rogue board, no transparency, no documentation, no legal filings. You do realize if this escalates, you have grounds for civil litigation, right? And criminal, I asked. She leaned back. Possibly. Depends how deep this goes. If they're collecting fines based on rules that don't legally exist, that's fraud. I emailed her everything. The notices, the fake section references, the violation tracker they used for fines. She told me to send it all to the state's HOA regulatory board too. That night, I got a knock on my door. It was an older man I didn't recognize. He had a cane, a postal cap, and the kind of quiet confidence that said he'd seen plenty in his time. You're the one who handed out the flyers, he asked. I am, he nodded. Name's Frank. I was on the original HOA board when this place was built. Retired last year after they railroaded through a vote without notifying half the residents. Thought I was just being bitter, but now I think you're onto something. He handed me a thin folder, meeting minutes, dated sign-in sheets. A copy of the bylaws with actual handwritten notes showing which pages were removed before the last neighborhood meeting. They've been cherry-picking the rules, he said. And they never met quorum. The vote was just the 5 board members. No one else was invited. How long's this been going on? Since Florinda got elected chair. She put her cousin on the board, then her neighbor, then started rewriting things without process. Most folks didn't question it, until now, apparently. I stared at the folder in my hands. You willing to talk to the state board? I'll do better. I'll talk to the local news. The next day, Angela filed a formal complaint with the Office of HOA Oversight. I submitted every document I had, including the forged violation notices and the altered bylaw pages. Frank gave a written statement. And Marcus? He found out one of the board members had been collecting administrative fees for processing payments, none of which were ever reported on the quarterly budget. By Friday, a letter went out from the Office of HOA Oversight to every resident of Willow Creek. It announced an immediate investigation into the HOA board for suspected fraud, rule tampering, and unauthorized fines. All ongoing penalties and charges were suspended pending review. Florinda's porch light didn't come on that night. For the first time in years, not a single board member showed up to the Saturday morning compliance walk. And while no one said anything officially, you could feel it like a storm had passed and the air was finally fresh again. But we weren't done. There was still one board meeting left on the calendar. And this time, the neighborhood was going to be there. All of us. The Willow Creek Clubhouse hadn't seen this many people since the Easter egg hunt 5 years ago. Cars lined both sides of the road. Lawn chairs were set up outside the building in case the room filled up. I stood near the front, just off to the side of the podium, watching neighbors file in as the clock inched toward 7. Florinda arrived last. She walked in with 2 of the remaining board members, her cousin Todd, who used to work at a car rental counter, and a woman named Jeanette, known mostly for handing out passive-aggressive notes about recycling bins. Florinda's hair was pinned tighter than usual, and she wore a mauve pantsuit with shoulder pads that made her look like she was ready to argue with a Supreme Court justice. Her expression didn't flicker once as she scanned the crowd. "Let's get this meeting underway," she said, tapping the microphone twice. No one clapped. She cleared her throat and launched into an opening statement about misinformation and recent confusion that led to unnecessary inquiries. She never used the word investigation. She never acknowledged the state's letter. She just rolled forward like nothing had changed. But then Greg raised his hand and didn't wait to be called on. "Is it true the HOA was issuing fines based on unfiled changes to the bylaws?" he asked loudly. Florinda gave a tight smile. "The board acted in good faith to maintain the community's integrity." "That's not an answer," Greg said. Maria stood up next. "Who authorized the fee increases last quarter? There's no record of a vote." Florinda's voice sharpened. "The board has discretion to manage operating costs without micromanagement from every resident." Frank, seated in the second row with his cane across his lap, slowly rose to his feet. Not without quorum, not without notifying the homeowners. And not without recording those changes with the county clerk. A murmur spread through the crowd. People were shifting forward in their chairs, leaning in. Florinda turned to the board members flanking her. Todd looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Jeanette pretended to reread the agenda packet. "Frank," Florinda said, "you're no longer on the board. You resigned." "You pushed me off it," he replied, "and I brought the meeting minutes to prove it." He held up a folder and the room fell silent. "I'd like to motion for a full vote of no confidence in the current board," he said. "You can't," Florinda started. "I can," he interrupted. "And I'm not the only one." He wasn't one by one. People stood, some with documents, others with screenshots. One woman even brought a printed spreadsheet detailing every fine she'd received over the last year, all of them, dated within 24 hours of her declining to join a volunteer planting committee Florinda had proposed. Then the door at the back of the room opened, and in walked 2 men in plain clothes with badges clipped to their belts. "Sorry to interrupt," said the taller one. "Detective Rayner, County Fraud Unit. We're looking for Florinda Stapleton." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "We have a court order to seize any HOA financial and administrative records in her possession," the detective announced. "Effective immediately." Florinda backed up half a step. "This is a private meeting." "Which makes no difference," Rayner replied. Multiple complaints were filed with documentation. A judge reviewed the evidence this morning. "We'll need access to the office, computer, and all homeowner correspondence." The silence was absolute. Florinda's hands twitched. "I don't have anything on me." The second detective stepped forward. "We've already spoken with the bank. There are discrepancies between the reported dues and the deposit records, he said. Over $24,000 unaccounted for since last September. Jeanette stood up so fast her chair tipped over. I didn't touch the funds, she said. She handled all the deposits. I just signed the meeting summaries. Todd raised both hands like he was being robbed. I didn't even know we had a second account. I thought everything went through the operating ledger. Florinda's jaw clenched. Ma'am, Rayner said, we'll need you to come with us. She didn't move. We can escort you or you can walk out. Your choice. It took her another 5 seconds before she turned toward the door. Her face didn't show a single emotion, but her legs moved like they weighed 100 pounds each. The detectives followed her out. No one said anything until the door clicked shut behind them. Then Frank stepped up to the podium. I think we've seen enough, he said. Under the emergency provisions in the original charter, we can appoint a temporary board until a full election is held. I propose we do that now. Nobody objected. 4 new names were nominated. Greg Maria, a local math teacher named Leon, and a pharmacist named Asha who'd never once been involved in HOA affairs but had quietly kept spreadsheets on every budget error she'd spotted for the last 2 years. I stayed out of it. I wasn't looking for a seat at the table. I just wanted the table balanced. The next day, the investigation made the local paper. It turned out Florinda had been funneling money into a separate account under the label Beautification Projects, which had no paper trail or oversight. From there, she'd written checks to a landscaping company registered to her brother-in-law. When the fraud unit dug deeper, they found she'd also billed the HOA for consulting fees under a fake LLC she created using a P.O. box in town. Altogether, over $32,000 had vanished in just under 18 months. Every homeowner received a letter from the county prosecutor's office explaining that restitution was being pursued and charges were pending, including wire fraud, misuse of fiduciary authority, and falsifying financial records. At the next community gathering, a potluck held in the cul-de-sac that used to host her monthly compliance reviews, neighbors brought folding tables, casseroles, and plastic cups. No one mentioned bylaws. No one brought a clipboard. Asha passed out a survey asking which rules people actually wanted to keep and which ones they thought were outdated. The top vote for removal: restrictions on mailbox colors. I passed by mine the next morning still black, still perfectly untouched, and saw someone had taped a little note to the side. Keep fighting the good fight. No signature. Just a drawing of a tiny crown with an X through it. The HOA wasn't gone, but it was different now. Transparent, accountable. Human, and Florinda, she never came back to Willow Creek, not even to collect her things. Her house went dark, her mailbox emptied, and a for sale sign appeared 2 weeks later. But every once in a while, I'd stand on my porch, coffee in hand, and glance at the sidewalk where she'd made that call, where she tried to paint herself as the victim while standing on someone else's property. And I'd remember that exact moment when the deputy looked down, saw her feet, and quietly ended her reign. All it took was a little sunlight, and a whole neighborhood finally paying attention. 3 weeks after the board was overthrown, I was out front replacing the rusted hinges on my fence gate when a white sedan pulled into the driveway across from mine. A man in khakis stepped out, followed by a woman carrying a thin briefcase. They didn't look like realtors, and they didn't knock on any doors. They walked straight toward the old HOA office, the small annex building next to the clubhouse that Florinda had converted into her personal command center. The woman unlocked the door with a key she'd taken from her bag. The man followed her in, holding what looked like a camera rig on a telescoping pole. Angela had warned me during our last call. If the state's involved and the fraud's as bad as it looks, they'll do a forensic audit. That means combing through everything: paper trails, emails, any trace of where the money went. I watched from my porch for a few more minutes before heading back to the garage. No reason to get in their way, but something stuck in my mind. The man paused outside the office before entering and took a photo of the building's front specifically, the security camera mounted under the eaves. It wasn't connected to anything anymore. I knew because I'd helped Greg uninstall the DVR box 2 days after the interim board took over. The footage was stored on a hard drive, which now sat in a locked drawer in Ashaz's home office. A day later, she called an emergency meeting. We gathered in the clubhouse again, only this time the chairs were arranged in a circle. No podium, no hierarchy. Everyone was handed a printed agenda. Just one item, underlined twice. Unexplained surveillance footage. Ashaz stood and set a USB drive into the laptop connected to the projector. The screen lit up with a grainy video showing the inside of the clubhouse office. The timestamp reads 6 months ago to the day. The footage showed Florinda entering the room with Todd trailing behind, carrying a cardboard box. She opened a file drawer, pulled out a thick binder, and flipped to a page near the back. Todd handed her a folder from the box. They exchanged a few words, no audio, but the gestures were easy to interpret. Florinda handed him a pen. He signed something. Then she pulled out a stack of index cards and fed them into a shredder. The next clip jumped forward. It showed Jeanette entering alone 2 nights later. She went straight to the same file drawer, pulled out a different binder, and removed 6 pages. She folded them, put them in her purse, and left. The final clip was just 2 minutes long but stunned the room into silence. It showed Florinda unlocking a drawer, removing what appeared to be a checkbook, and writing out 3 checks in quick succession. Each one she sealed into an envelope, then placed in the outgoing mailbox tray. She paused before leaving, looked directly into the camera, and then reached up, blocking the lens with a handkerchief. The footage cut out there. Ashaz pressed pause. The state auditors found no record of those checks, she said. But one of the envelopes had a smudge of red ink that matched the stamp pad in this office. They lifted a partial fingerprint. It matched Florinda. Leon, seated beside her, added the check stubs were missing, but the carbon impressions left faint outlines. One of the names on the pay-to-line matched an LLC registered out of state, no employees, no website, just a P.O. box in Arizona. No HOA business should involve out-of-state payments, said Maria. That's embezzlement. Greg raised a hand. So what now? The answer came sooner than expected. That evening, a plain white SUV with government plates parked outside the clubhouse. A pair of federal agents entered with a warrant. They spent 2 hours collecting files, hard drives, and even the office printer. One of them asked to speak with Frank, who'd stayed behind after the meeting, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup. Frank walked outside with them. I followed at a distance, curious but quiet. The older agent turned to him. You're listed as the last properly elected board treasurer on file with the county. We'll need a sworn statement from you confirming which accounts were legitimate during your tenure. Frank nodded. I kept the old ledgers. I'll bring them tomorrow. The agent paused. We're also pursuing a federal angle. If funds crossed state lines under false pretenses, that's wire fraud. Potentially RICO if we find coordinated activity. Frank blinked. RICO, that's serious. The agent didn't blink. So is laundering HOA dues through shell companies. A week later, Florinda was arrested at a boutique hotel in Charleston. She'd checked in under her maiden name. The extradition request was approved the same day. Local news picked it up by nightfall. They showed her being escorted through the courthouse lobby in a beige trench coat, sunglasses on, lips pressed so tightly together they looked bloodless. Jeanette and Todd were each served subpoenas. Todd agreed to cooperate in exchange for leniency. Jeanette lawyered up. Angela called again. The prosecutor's office contacted me. They want me to help organize a restitution plan. If the court seizes the remaining assets, they'll want someone impartial to work with the neighborhood. You think we'll get any of it back? I asked. Some, she said. Not all. But enough to fix what they broke. The next month was filled with busy work, but the good kind. The interim board held real elections. Ashaz stayed on. Greg was voted in as president. Maria handled communications. Frank declined a formal role but offered to audit the books monthly until trust was rebuilt. And me. I decided to repair the old tool shed behind the clubhouse. It was the only structure on the property no one had ever tried to control. Half the neighborhood pitched in. We planted wildflowers around it, hung a little wooden sign above the door. The Commons. On the first weekend of summer, we threw a block party. No rules, no forms, no permission slips. Just food, music, and about 60 people who finally remembered what it felt like to be neighbors. I stood beside the grill, flipping burgers, while Greg recounted the time Florinda ordered him to remove his porch swing because it encouraged loitering. "Next time someone tries that," he said, "I'll install a second one." Leon laughed. "I'll build you a third." A HOA walked by with a clipboard not for violations but for volunteers. She was organizing a community garden. No fees, no hidden fines, just dirt and seeds. As the sun dipped low, I wandered back to my porch. My black mailbox stood exactly as it always had, untouched and unbothered. I leaned on the railing and looked across the street. Florinda's old house had sold to a young couple with 2 kids and a pit bull named Daisy. The kids rode scooters in the driveway. Daisy barked at squirrels. No one had been fined for anything in weeks. Then I saw something new. A small bronze plaque had been mounted on the clubhouse wall, right next to the door. It read, "In gratitude to those who stood up, spoke out, and stayed honest." Below it was a list of names not mine, not Angela's, not even Frank's, but the names of every homeowner who showed up at that first meeting after the fall. The ones who stood when they didn't have to. I smiled, not because we'd won, but because we'd endured. The HOA still existed. The rules still existed, but now so did the people behind them, and that made all the difference.